Hello everyone, I'm Dr. B. This is Dr. B Music Theory. I'm doing another live Q&A, but before I get started, and I'm going to look over here to my computer to just make sure everything is running just fine, so please excuse me as I glance over here. So what I'd like to do before I get into answering some of the questions that people have already submitted me is kind of like give you a little bit of background of what you're looking at. So if you're new to Dr. B Music Theory, what you should really know is that on my YouTube channel, I have a series of lessons, like I think it's lessons 1 through 49, and they're all in order of difficulty and complexity. And so you should definitely start with lesson 1 and go in order. I know that there's maybe a temptation to jump to the topic that you're most interested in at a particular moment. But if you're not experienced with music theory, you should go through them in order because each one builds upon the next. And you'll end up getting a little bit confused and have a little harder time learning something if there's some holes missing in your foundation. Now, if you're experienced with music theory and you're just looking to brush up or get a little deeper knowledge, then feel free to jump around. And in each of the lessons in the description, I list exactly what I'm talking about in each one of them you can just click on the timing and go straight to that section. I also list if I misspoke or anything, I make corrections right in the description. So do look at the description when you're going to watch one of these lesson videos. I also have some of the Q&A videos which cover a variety of topics with different difficulties. I have a lot of Ask Dr. B Music Theory series. So feel free to look at those, realizing that they're going to be of varying difficulty and complexity. And so some of the topics might be too advanced for you if you haven't gone through all the lessons. Please subscribe if you're new so that you can get in and click the bell so that you'll get a notification when I do something like this, a live video, or I upload a new video. Now, to be fair, you will also get some notifications of non-music theory videos when I upload them because my YouTube channel is dedicated to all things Dr. B and all my projects. So you might get notifications on my big research project that I've been working on for the last year and a half is Music of the Gilded Age. So you might get some notification of those videos. If that doesn't interest you, it won't upset me. You don't have to watch them. But if you're curious, I think there's some pretty interesting stuff that I've been uncovering in my research. You also might get some videos about the Academy of Music. I'm a full-time professor at a college. Actually, I teach at 2 different colleges, one full-time and one part-time. And I'm chair of an Academy of Music. And the Academy of Music covers not only college credit, but credit-free offerings, so for kids as well as lifelong learners. So you might see some videos that I post on that. Again, if that does not interest you, feel free to ignore them. That said, the Academy, with all the pandemic going on, we've shifted to almost all of our offerings online now. So if you want to go through the Academy I'm chair of and study with some of the amazing teachers that I've put together as part of the team for the Dutchess Community College Academy of Music, you should go ahead and look up Dutchess Community College. I'll put a link for that in the description as well so that you can go and you can take some of online classes and lessons through us. And we've put together a great team. So without further ado, and before I get to questions, I decided I'm ready to share this. I'm calling this Dr. B's demonic chord progression. Now this is something that I stumbled upon when I was going to school as an undergraduate, age 18, 19, 20. And I was experimenting with harmonies, and I found this chord progression that I thought was so amazing and so interesting from both a theoretical standpoint as well as from the way it sounded. And I actually used it in a number of different compositions I've used. One was a jazz big band composition, one was more of like a progressive rock type song. But I think this progression has a really unique theoretical underpinnings that's worth delving into, and kind of shows the kind of experimentation that you might be interested in conducting for your own arrangements and your own compositions. Now, don't worry. My interest in the demonic is very similar to what Carl Maria von Weber would be in his opera Der Freischütz. So German, supernatural, romanticized sensibility is where I'm coming from. So no need to worry about me. This kind of music has translated really well into film music. So think Batman, The Dark Knight, or things like that. And you can get some of those sensibilities. So let me begin. And bear with me, and it might take a little while. So I have the actual progression right here, and it can be transposed into different keys, but here's the progression. All alone, I'm not even going to play it right now. I'm going to make you wait for it, okay? Because I want to explain how I came to it. And it starts with an augmented triad. So if you take a G augmented triad, as I have indicated right there, we recognize that it has this kind of a symmetry, right? Because the first interval is a major third with another major third. So it's a stacked major thirds. And if you went D sharp up another major third, it would technically be F double sharp. And F double sharp is enharmonically the same as a G, which is your root. So what happens if you will go up a major third, G to B, up a major third, B to D sharp, up a major third, D sharp to enharmonically G, you can just keep on going. It's an infinite system. It's not a closed system like a major or a minor triad where you have these variety of intervals. These are all the same intervals. So it has this really unique quality to it. And people like Claude Debussy explored that extensively, as well as other late 19th century, early 20th century composers. Just listen. Right? So very often it evokes dream or imagination. So think about movies or television where someone's falling asleep and you might hear, imagine that on a harp, right? That's just an augmented triad, and it can kind of just keep going on forever because it's all just major thirds. That's a really big difference. With a major triad, you go major third, minor third, perfect fourth. Then you get back to your root. So it has this variety, the variety of intervals that make it up. The fact that an augmented triad has all the same interval gives it a different quality. So I started with playing around with the augmented triad, which I thought was a really interesting triad. And if we look at music history and music theory, it's not used very much. Not by Bach, not by Mozart, not by Beethoven. It takes a bit longer. I mean, you can find examples, don't get me wrong, but they're infrequent. You'll find diminished triads far more often in traditional music theory than you'll find augmented triads. So after I was playing around with the augmented triad, I was interested in jazz, and so there was certain songs like Horace Silver's Nika's Dream, and there was kind of the kind of film, the kind of crime dramas like Harlem Nocturne, and they used these minor major 7 chords. So you'd hear, and you might have something like It Was a Dark Stormy Night, Mike Hammer, or something like that, right? You have that minor major 7. And so if you look at a minor major 7, and I'm just going to pop in this and explain to you what exactly is a minor major 7. It's a 7th chord, but it's not one of the common 5 sonorities of 7th chords that are used. The common sonorities are a major triad with a major 7, right? So the first letter indicates the triad, and the second letter and number indicate what kind of 7th. So this is an interval. The second part is an interval. First part is triad. So major major 7, major minor 7, which is the most common 7th chord, minor minor 7, diminished minor 7, and diminished 7. Those are the 5 common types of 7th chords. But there's other options, right? There's other possibilities. And the one I was interested was a minor triad with a major 7. And this is not something new. This is not a new seventh chord. As I mentioned, it's been used before in those settings. So if I put an E underneath this G major, G augmented triad, so what was a G augmented triad is now becoming an E minor triad with a major 7. Again, I use this minus sign to indicate minor. That's not the only option. It's the option I like the best because that M, sometimes when people use M's, lowercase and uppercase M's, it's, if you're handwriting it, old school, sometimes it's hard to know the difference between an uppercase M and a lowercase m. So the minus sign can never be confused with an M. So that's what I like to use. So it now becomes an E minor triad. So E, G, B is your E minor triad. And E to D sharp is a major 7. And so I use MA, which is a common, just to make double sure again, so we're not any confusion about what kind of 7. So an E minor triad, E, G, B, so minor third, perfect fifth, with a major 7, E to D sharp. So if we take a look at that sonority, here's the thing that I then figured out. E minor major 7. Now let me just indicate it like this. All right, let me just, so it's super, super clear here. E minor major 7. Now here's where the innovation comes in. Here's the discovery, okay? So bear with me. It's still going to take a little bit to explain. If instead I keep the same G major triad, G augmented triad. I keep the same G augmented triad. Instead of putting an E, let's say I put a C natural. What kind of seventh chord does that create, if any? Well, it creates, with some enharmonic magic, a C minor triad with a major 7. Check that out. Same augmented triad, different root, different bass note. All right? And you get it. Check it out. So here's how it happens. We've got the C. The D sharp is enharmonically the same as E flat. We have the G. There's our minor triad. The B is our major 7. Same sonority. So the sonority between the E minor major 7 and the C minor major 7, it keeps 3 common tones. The augmented triad stays exactly the same. And just by changing one note, you get a third, a distantly related C, E to C. Actually, I shouldn't say that's distantly related. But in terms of keys, E minor versus C minor, they're distantly related, if we were looking at it in that sense. And you get another minor major 7 sonority with just that change. But there's more. What if I keep that same G augmented triad, and instead of an E or C, how about I put A flat in the bass? What sonority do we get then? Well, guess what? We get the same sonority, a minor major 7. So we get an A flat minor triad with a major 7 with just a little bit of enharmonic spelling. Let me show you. A flat is our root. The B natural is enharmonically the same as C flat. The D sharp is the same enharmonically as E flat. And the G is our major 7. A flat minor triad with a major, A flat minor triad with a major 7. Yet again, we have this extension of the G augmented triad, and we can put any one of these bass notes underneath it, and it creates the same sonority. Now, there's more really interesting things about this kind of chord makeup. So what I'm really investigating is the augmented triad and its relationship to the minor major 7 sonority. Check out the relationship of the 3 different bass note options. E, C, A flat. G, a major 3rd and a major 3rd. This creates another augmented triad. So right here, if we were to take that, this would be an A flat augmented triad, and on the top we have this kind of G augmented triad. Now I'm not putting them both together at the same time, so, and bass notes, but we could, you know, we could put them together and you would have basically two augmented triads connected by a minor third. So major third, so this is A flat, C, E natural, so that's major third, major third. And I'm going to write this out, so we're going to go A flat, I'm sorry, I should write it a little bit better, and then I'll get out of the way so you can see it, so bear with me. All right, I'm just making this so it's really clear. So sometimes you put a little line over the M to make sure it's lowercase. I have an A flat, up a major third, creating an A flat augmented triad. I keep saying, getting my terms, so it's easy to get confused. So please make sure you catch me if I make a mistake. So major thirds creating an A flat augmented triad, then connect the E to the G by a minor third and have another augmented triad of major third, major third. That kind of like polychord is something Darius Milhaud, French composer, and people like Stravinsky would have explored. And a number of you have mentioned that you're interested in me embarking on a Dr. B music history. And so all these names, it's something I'm pretty certain I'm going to be doing later this summer. So all these names really help connect, you know, to understand how music theory relates to the history is very interesting and meaningful. So getting back to our question at hand here, what I found so interesting is I could have this augmented triad, and I could either have it be an E minor major 7, or a C minor major 7, or a A flat minor major 7. And if I went down another major third, I get back to the E minor major 7. So this is not quite, we're not yet to the demonic chord progression yet, but you get a sense of how this feels, right? Just listen to the intensity and the drama of just changing bass notes under this common augmented triad in the right hand. If I go, that's pretty dark and massive. I get images of Modest Mussorgsky's Night on Bald Mountain, especially if you think about the Disney's version of Fantasia, which has the demon coming out of the volcano and all the spirits. You get that sense, and that's just doing E minor major 7 to C minor major 7 to A flat minor major 7, and then finally ending back on the E minor major 7. So keeping the G augmented triad and just changing the bass notes. So what's so interesting to the ear is the ear hears that it's all the same kind of 7th chord, even though the bass note's changing. And that's really rare. That doesn't really occur with a lot of different kind of other kind of chord sonorities. This is really, really unique to the augmented triad and the minor major 7 sonority. So after I experimented with that, I thought to myself, you know, how could you then move above and beyond just changing the bass notes? And one of the things that people like Debussy would do, or any kind of smooth voice leading, is move things, right? Debussy would do parallel stuff. So I said, you know, parallel harmonies instead of more kind of traditional voice leading. So I said, what if I take the G augmented triad and just were to go up in half steps. What if I were to do that, right? So let me take my E minor major 7, and I'll just move everything up in half steps, right? So just check this out. Now, parallelism is great, but contrary motion has like this power to it, right? So just moving, going E minor major 7 to F minor major 7 to G minor major 7, it's just all parallel. It doesn't have that extra depth to it. But check, this is almost what's happening in this progression. But I use the option of having 3 different bass note options to play with the ascending chromatic motion. So in the E minor major 7, as we've discussed, G, B, D sharp is the augmented triad that would go on top of that. If I were to move that up a half step, G sharp, B sharp, and I'm going to call it E, right? But it's still just augmented triad up a half step. And then I'm going to move it up another half step to A natural, and I'm going to call it D flat now, and F. And then here, I'm going to move it up a half step again. I'm going to call it B flat, D natural, F sharp. I'm going to move it up a half step again to B natural, D sharp, and G. So G, G sharp, A, B flat, B natural. Up a chromatic scale, right? B, B sharp, D flat, because B sharp is the same thing as C, D flat, D natural, D sharp. And I'll play it on the piano so you can hear it, right? Because it looks a little funny. It looks a little funny, but we have B, B sharp, D flat, D natural, D sharp. And then the top part, D sharp, E, F, F sharp, G. Now, I could just have E on the bottom, E, F, F sharp, G, G sharp, and just playing it up, and it would still be all E minor, minor major 7s. But what I did is I changed the bass notes, right? So I took the E, and here you could either have an F, an A, or a C sharp. Any one of those 3 bass notes would create the minor major 7 sonority. So instead of taking F, I said, let me do a C sharp, right? So I chose the C sharp of those. I made it a C sharp minor major 7. So I'm going to write that in. And here, the choice would be either F sharp, B flat, or D. And I chose the B flat. And so I could put a B flat down here. I'm sorry, this is a little bit, I'm actually going to erase this part down here so we have a little bit more room so it's a little clearer as you're looking and trying to follow along. Again, if I'm going a little bit fast, I'm assuming you all know your minor triads and your augmented triads and you can do it all very quickly. If that's not the case, feel free to pause the video. The same principle that you should use when you're reading a textbook or any kind of book and you see a word that you don't know, don't just skip it and go, I kind of understand what it is. Look it up, stop, pause, look it up. Do the same thing here. If you're not following along quite quickly, able to follow along with the triads quickly enough, pause, figure it out. You'll find that investment of time pays huge dividends down the road. So as we said, here the choices were either F, A, or C sharp. We chose the C sharp. Here, the options, again, and I'm saying E was our first choice here. And instead of, if we just moved it up, it could go E, F, and then it could go to F sharp, right? So F sharp, B flat, or D. And here I chose the B flat. Here it could be G, B, or D sharp. I chose the G. And then we go back to where we started. And the choices are E, C, or A flat. And I chose the E. And again, the whole idea is what I said here is you have for every augmented triad, there's 3 possible bass notes that will create a minor major 7 sonority. That's the whole premise of this. So what we have now is Dr. B's demonic chord progression. Here it is. So it has the augmented triad moving up chromatically while the bass descends in minor thirds. And it creates this contrary motion of one thing going down in basically a diminished E, C sharp, B flat, G, E. It's like a diminished 7 chord. Well, you have these augmented triads planing up chromatically. Let me play that again for you, and I'll do it with a like more of a rhythmic sense as well, so you can get a sense of one option rhythmically. You could have. Oh, I'm sorry, that was a mistake. It could be orchestral, it could have a rhythm. I think it could work in a number of different settings. But that's it. That's Dr. B's demonic chord progression. And it shows that interesting relationship between the augmented triad, the minor major 7. Now, what if I did some other things? And this is by no means the full possibilities. What if instead of choosing the notes I circled in black, I did this? Okay, start with the E, then I go to A, then I go to D, then I go to the G, and then I go to C. Why would I even consider something like that? Well, now I have a circle of fifths bass line, descending fifths. I have to think about this. This is a little, my brain. So there we go, right? So now we have a bass line like 3, 6, 2, 5, 1, or something like that, right? But with completely different kind of sonorities vertically in the minor major 7, and very different kind of voice leading of the upper voices. So you could do that. The reason I chose that is not being quite as demonic as you get that diminished, the diminished bass line, which I think is less familiar to the ear. But so let me backtrack just a second. So this going down in fifths or up in fourths, is kind of the same thing. Going through the circle of fifths. That's like a forward motion. It's going even the right direction. And the ear is used to that pattern. And you can, it latches onto it, makes a ton of sense. Now, going down in minor thirds is also a pattern. It's just not as common a pattern as the circle of fifths. And so to kind of keep the more mysterious, dramatic, demonic quality, I chose to use the diminished descending minor thirds, creating a diminished 7 chord. Keep in mind that all the way back in the Middle Ages, the church said that the tritone, the diminished fifth, was the devil's interval, and it was a dissonance, and a very strong dissonance, and so creating that dissonance, but still a dissonance that is understandable, gives it quite the quality I was looking for at that time. But there are other options. You could soften it by going through the circle of fifths. I also, haven't talked about other motion of the augmented triad. Like, what if it was going down chromatically? What if it moved up in whole steps instead of half steps? There's a whole bunch of options. But the fundamental crux of what I was playing around with was the idea of augmented triads and then 3 different roots that could all create the same 7th chord sonority. So anyways, that's it. Dr. B's demonic chord progression. Thanks Thanks for listening. I've never shared this before, other than in my compositions. I thought for sure, and I'm sure some other composers have done this, it's just when I was 18 years old, it was new to me, and I discovered it, so it felt really fresh, and I thought for sure I was going to revolutionize, write it in some symphony, it would become used by everyone. That hasn't happened. That's okay. I'm sharing my music now through these videos, so I give it all to you. You may feel free to use it. There's no copyright on my chord progression, so feel free to use it. I would love to hear it in some music. Alrighty, so before I turn to the chat, and I can see we got some people listening, which is awesome, and some messages in the chat, but before I go to that, I did want to go to one of the questions that one of my Patreon subscribers had sent to me ahead of time for this Saturday afternoon. And I'm pretty busy, but I'm hoping to try to do an every other week throughout the summer, Saturdays Eastern time, 1 p.m. Eastern time. So, hopefully, I'm not promising, but I'm going to strive for Saturdays every other week. So the question I had is, could you comment on the role that common and leading tones let's start again. Could you comment on the role that common and leading tones have in the progression map? So the progression map is the harmonic progression map and I'm just going to do it in major. So 3, 6, 2, 5, 1. Now there's more to it, right? Oops, and let me not make mistakes and confuse you all. 3, 6, 2. In addition to 2, this is our predominant phase. You can also have the 4 chord. The 5 is the dominant, 7 diminished. So 4 often will go to 2 within the predominant, not the other way around. 5 will often go to 7 diminished in the dominant, but not the other way around. 3 can leapfrog straight to the 4. So and any one of these phases can go to the next phase. So if you start at 1 can go to any one of these chords. So you can jump on kind of like this, consider it like the harmonic conveyor belt. 1 can jump to anywhere on the harmonic conveyor belt. However, once you get on the conveyor belt, there's certain paths you can only go. So if you jump on at 3, then your options are 6 or 4. That's it. And if you jump on at 6, your options are 4 or 2. If you jump on at 4, and there's another leapfrog, right? 4 can go to 2, 5, 7 diminished, or 1. You got a lot of options. And if you jump in at 2, it can go to 5 or 7 diminished. And if you jump on at 5, it can go to 7 diminished, 1, and there's a jump back allowed to 6. And then you can see we've got all our diatonic chords. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So the question was, the role of common tones and leading tones have on this progression. So that's a really interesting question, and one I haven't really given a ton of thought to. So I'm a little bit working on the spot here, which is fine. That's what makes a live Q&A somewhat interesting. So let me put a staff here. So we know that common tones, when we're talking about voice leading, is really good. Smooth voice leading, keeping the common tone. That's standard practice. It keeps the melody smooth. It makes it so that you avoid part writing errors that make things sound weird. So in general, common tone, I always say common tone, this is your friend. It makes it really hard for you to break other rules, right? Common tones just make your life easier. And the leading tones, so leading tones specifically is scale degree 7 of whatever key. So scale degree 7 is going to be found in this chord, the 5 chord, so the 3 chord, the 5 chord, and the 7 diminished. It really only functions as a leading tone here. And when I say function, meaning it has the sensibility of wanting you to lead back. So so common tone, so this is a little, the question is a little funny. Common tones have no association with scale degrees. It's all about voice leading. Whereas the leading tone is actually referencing a specific scale degree. Now, you can have temporary leading tones. So when you talk about secondary functions, like if we're talking about 5 6 5 of 5 or 7 diminished 6 of 2, there's going to be a temporary leading tone in the key of the 2 or the key of the 5. And if this is something you don't know, I got a lesson for that. It's called secondary functions. So you can look that up. So these are somewhat different concepts. Common tone, again, no connection to scale degrees. Leading tone, connected to a scale degree. The idea of using a leading tone is that leading tone is expected to resolve up by step. All right? Resolve up by step. There's an exception. An exception is possible when it's in an inner voice, meaning the alto or the tenor. Okay? If it's in the alto or the tenor, the leading tone does not have to resolve up by step. It will often instead resolve down by a major third. All right? If your leading tone is in the soprano or the bass, it must resolve up. So how do these concepts relate to the chord harmonic progression chart? So let's just look at that first straight across circle of fifths progression. If we're in the key of C major, and I go to 3, and then we're going to 3 to 6, right? The common tone I'm going to keep is the, again, if we're in the key of C major, and let me actually put it with lead sheet symbols for my jazz players and my rock players and guitar players. Lead sheet symbols is going to be a lot more comfortable. 6 is A minor. We're going to stick with the 2 chords, so it's going to be D minor, G major triad, C, right? So if we look at that, so we are at the E stays as a common tone to the A minor, and the other 2 move by step, but they're not leading tones. Here, the A stays the same as a common tone. Now between the D minor and G, the G stays, and then the G. So we have one note that's a common tone when you're going through the circle of fifths. Always one note, right? So the common tone between E minor and A minor is the E. It's always the root of the, right? Here it's the A, here it's the D, here it's the G. It's always the root of the previous chord becomes the root of the first chord becomes the fifth of the second chord. That's your common tone. So that's how common tones relate in that sense. But we know that there's other options, right? So if we're going, let's say 3 to jumping to 4, we got 0 common tones. And this is why 3 to 4 is like one of the areas that people make the most mistakes with, like as music theory students, because everyone's like, oh look, we're just going to move everything up, you know? But that kind of parallel motion is not allowed in traditional it makes it feel really blocky. So if you have a chorus trying to sing something, it doesn't sound like individual voices coming together and harmonizing. It sounds like a giant block. So when you go from E minor to F major, the bass moves up by step and everything else moves down in contrary motion. And so when you go 4 to 5, that's that same thing. So if we were looking at another progression of, let's say, 3, we're going E minor to 4, F major to G major. Here, you have everything has to move. There's 0 common tones, right? So you're going from everything is contrary motion. So if I have, this is the right hand. And the bass would kind of move up by step, and this is how the right hand would work. I'll play it again for you. This is in treble clef. So the common tone is, you know, in relationship to this harmonic progression, it's not, it doesn't seem to play a critical role in like how the chords relate, because we can have good chord progressions that have 0 common tones between them. We can have good chord progressions that have 1 common tone between them. If we take the chord progression 1, 6, 4, and then 5, 1, right? So let's say our next progression is 1, 6, 4, 5. I just switched. 5, 1. 1 to 6, 6 to 4. So 1 would be C, E, G. 6 would be A, C, E. 4 would be F, A, C. You can see that in that progression, 1 to 6, we have 2 common tones. And 6 to 4, we also have 2 common tones, right? So 1, 6, 4. So you can have 0 common tones, you can have 1 common tone, you can have 2 common tones. So what is the role of common tones in the progression map? It doesn't really have one, to answer the question. What is the role of leading tones in the chord progression map? Well, it's only a leading tone here, and the leading tone does have a role. It's what drives you back to tonic. And the only exception to that is when you have what's called a deceptive resolution, where 5 goes to 6. But that leading tone, even when you have that 5 deceptive resolution, it's still, that leading tone still resolves up to tonic, right? So if we're here in a 1 chord, 4, 5, we don't go to 1, we go to 6, but that leading tone goes to tonic anyways. So you could have gone as expected, so 1 leading tone, or 1 leading tone. So that leading tone will drive you back to the tonic scale degree, regardless of whether your progression goes to 1 or to 6. So that is the role of the leading tone in the chord progression map. So I think that was what the question was, and I think I answered it for you. So thank you for submitting it. I'm going to take a look here right now. I got blue misses. All right, yeah, made it to a live one. All right. I know many of you get to watch these videos after the fact, and that's certainly great, but it's nice that you can be here as well. Got a nice comment. Channel is very helpful for serious music learners. That's the whole point, right? I'm teaching music theory for college, and music theory is one of the kind of classes that separates who's going to make it and who is not as a musician and traditional academic. So I got to have the standard. There's so many times students have been like, Dr. B, nobody in the class is understanding it. Can't you slow down and make it easier? And I go, no, there's a standard. You have to learn this amount of information in this amount of time. Either you can do it or you can't. Now you can take the class again. There's no problem with that. There's no shame in that. Sometimes you might need more than one try to get it. But the standard has to be the standard, because you then have to go, you know, this is how we know whether you're going to have the academic and intellectual skills to make it in a very challenging field, being a musician. All right. Another nice comment here. Your channel helped me so much to understand and improve in music. I'm very grateful and will be soon on Patreon. Oh, good. Well, listen, guys, I understand, YouTube, this is free. This is my, this is just out for you. If you can support me on Patreon, that's great, but it's not an obligation. It only helps me spend more of my time and focus more of my energies on it. So if you can help me there, wonderful. All right, some people have, I'm the only, taught you everything you know about music theory. Awesome. All right. As per my knowledge, parallel octaves, unison, and fifths are prohibited, but I can see a lot of orchestral pieces from Bach and Mozart with parallel unisons. Why is it so? Excellent question. Excellent question. All right. So, thank you. So this is let me see how I'm going to answer this question, because I always try to answer it as clearly as I possibly can, which is not always easy on the spot. So let's see how I can do. So when you're talking about seeing lots of parallel octaves and fifths, which you do, you have to distinguish between orchestration and the voice leading. Let me explain what I mean this. So your basic, if we were to look at, let's say, a Bach 4-part chorale, there are 4 separate parts: soprano, alto, tenor, bass. They do their things. In this setting, the orchestration is, there's one part, you have one soprano section, one alto section, one tenor section, one bass section. That's it. And so the voice leading is pretty much really obvious on what happens and how the voices. And then there, those rules apply. Yes, Bach does break some of these rules every now and then. He does it for a reason, for some kind of, to reinforce the text or to kind of make the melody better, but it's so uncommon that you have to make sure that when you're writing, you're not just breaking it all the time and for no reason. Yes, you can break the rules if you know you are and there's a reason. If there's no reason, follow the rules. It's what's going to make more sense. Now, when you talk about, let's say, a Bach oratorio or passion, or not a passion, I should say, like St. John's Passion or St. Matthew's Passion, here you not only have the chorus, you have violin 1, violin 2, viola, cello, bass. You probably have, you might have a trumpet. You might have oboe. You might have flute. So when we're dealing with an entire orchestration, there's going to be doublings. They're going to take this core voice leading. 4-part is very common, sometimes 5-part. And they're going to double it. So one thing that can easily happen when you're analyzing orchestral work, piece for orchestra. And orchestration doesn't have to mean specifically for orchestra. Orchestration means how you take these melodies, let's say you have your 4 melodies, and what instruments you give them to. And that could be instruments or voices. So that's the concept of orchestration. Now, it's most important when you're dealing with an actual orchestra, hence the similarity in the word, because there's so many different instruments, right? There's a woodwind section, there's a brass section, there's a string section. This is like a bare bones orchestra. You might have trombones, you might have saxophones, you might have clarinet. You could have a lot of instruments in an orchestra. They're not going to be, so you might have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 12 different, but it's not 12 different instrument families, or sorry, not instrument families, but instruments. But you're not necessarily having 12-part harmony. It might still just be 4-part harmony, but with doublings. So when you have those doublings, it can look like, oh, look, the flute and the oboe, they're moving in parallel unison. It's because they are essentially the soprano. Keep in mind, the reason prohibited for parallel fifths octaves and unisons. The reason it's prohibited is because if you do it, it sounds like it's one voice. That's the fundamental reason. So if you say to yourself, there's a richness in 4-part harmony, which there is. Like 4 is kind of like the magic number. I shouldn't even use the word magic. 4 is what after centuries of creating music with a different number of parts was like, this is like enough parts where there's enough variety to keep it interesting, but not so many that it becomes overwhelming, right? It's the sweet spot. Let me say it again. How many different melodies can you have to keep things interesting and rich without having so many that it becomes overwhelming and just too much to comprehend? 4 is like the perfect number for the human brain. All right? So you have 4 different melodies. That's what our brains can keep track of really well. Sometimes 5, maybe 6 on occasion. 3 is no problem. 2 is starting to get a little bit, maybe, there's only so long you can only have 2 voices without it getting boring. 4 is the sweet spot. Now, flute oboe playing the same thing, let's say in octaves or unison, becomes one melody. And that's okay if you still have 4-part harmony at some point, right? So you might have violin 1, 2. So like in a traditional orchestra, violin 1 is one melody, violin 2 is another melody, viola is another melody, cello and bass often doubled at the octave. That's fine. 1 melody, 2 melody, 3 melody, 4 melody. That's what we were just talking about. And then if you double, let's say some of our brass instruments stuff, as long as you're not having so much doubling that you stop having 4-part harmony, it's not a problem. And the real problem is when you have regular doubling and voice leading where you're avoiding it, and then it changes and it keeps changing back and forth, so that what happens is, and this is like a bad composing, will be like 4-part harmony, and then all of a sudden you'll be going along, and then it's 3-part harmony, and then it's 4-part harmony again, then it's 2-part harmony, and then back to 4-part harmony. And when it changes in this kind of erratic, unpredictable way that doesn't make sense, because you're all of a sudden using a parallel octave or a parallel fifth at random erratic spots, it becomes very disorienting for the listener. If it were just 3 voices throughout, your ear would be fine. Or if it was 3 voices and then it builds up dynamically and you spread out into 4 voices. So sometimes in an orchestra you'll see something called divisi, where they divide the violins, because a violin 1 is like 10 violinists all playing that part. And they might divide it to create a certain expansion, but it's going to be for a musical reason. So my guess is that the reason you see so many parallel octaves, fifths, and unisons is that you're observing an orchestrational technique as opposed to the actual voice leading of the 4-part harmony. So that would be my guess, because you will see some of it in the 4-part, but you will not see a lot. All right, hopefully that answered that question. It was a good one. Great. How to use diminished major 7 in non-jazz. Diminished major 7. Well, we haven't really I haven't talked about that. So I was talking about the minor major 7, but let's talk about diminished major 7, because that is another 7th chord sonority that is not common. So a diminished major 7. So let's just go like C, E flat, G flat, B natural. So this sonority is often used as a alternative version of a fully diminished 7 sound, and here's why. So a fully diminished chord would be C, E flat, G flat, B double flat. And then the question is, so this would be a diminished 7. What scale would you use? And you then find composers using what they call the octatonic scale, or an 8-note scale. I think this is how you say it. But the scale is C, D, E flat, F, G flat, A flat, A natural, and again it could be N harmonic, B natural, C. So if we say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 notes before you repeat. So when we talk about the octave in a C major scale, C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C. On the 8th note, we get back to the note that we started on, hence the octave. But here, we've got 8 notes before. And what's interesting is this is a symmetrical scale. So you'll notice that C to D is a whole step, D to E flat. Oh, let me do this the right way. Let me do this a little clearer. D to E flat is a half step. E flat to F is a whole step. F to G flat is a half step. G flat to A flat is a whole step. A flat to A natural and harmonically a half step. A to B, a whole step. B back to C, a half step. So it is a completely symmetrical scale, unlike the major scale, which is not a repeating pattern. It's a completely symmetrical scale in the sense that it just has that pattern, and it just, in the sense like that we were just talking about with the augmented triad, where there's really no ending to the scale because it doesn't have a like closed spot where you're saying, oh, it could stop here because it has this certain number of whole steps and half steps before it then repeats itself. This one could just keep going on and on. So and the reason I bring this up is if we look at the fully diminished 7, we call the A same as B double flat, right? You'll notice that in the scale you do have the B natural. So this D minor major 7 can kind of take the, I would say, actually let me say, takes the A and you can kind of replace it with the B. So B replaces A. It's still coming out of the same scale. So you can have so, and very often, so that's that. So the thing is, it does like, so you might start with the D minor, D diminished major 7, and go to, and I'm resolving to D flat minor here, is what I'm hearing. So you might hear this, move to this, actually, so it's coming like that. And then resolve to the D flat minor. The other place, and I'm getting to the second part of your question, I haven't forgot it. You said in a non-jazz setting, so I'm going to get there. This sound is often sometimes used as a substitute for 1, so you'll get like a 1 chord, diminished major 7, going to 1 chord. So you'll hear something like, and you get then as your 1 chord. So you might get 3, 6, or 5 of 2 really, 2, 5, and then 1 diminished 7, 1 diminished major 7. So it's almost like they come like, they kind of feel like retardations in terms of a non-chord tone. Now the question that said, well, how do you do it in a non-jazz setting? I would look to Claude Debussy as the answer to that, because a lot of the jazz harmonies came from the French composers like Debussy and Ravel. So one of the kind of fundamental differences between jazz and, let's say, classical music would be from a harmonic standpoint is what's your resolve state? Is it the triad or the seventh chord? So if you want to make things sound more pop, rock, classical, triad is your most resolved home bass tonic. If you want to make it sound jazz, the seventh chord is your kind of like your one chord. So in classical music, you might have all types of seventh chords, but you'll eventually resolve on major triad. In jazz, you wouldn't do that. You might have all these seventh chords, but you would eventually resolve on a major seven chord, let's say. So if you want to use a diminished major seven to make it sound like a non-jazz type of harmonic setting, try resolving to triads as opposed to other seventh chords. That would probably be your best bet on how to make it sound in a non-jazz setting. The other thing that's the big distinguishing thing is rhythmically, of course. So rhythmically, jazz feels very different than other styles of music. All styles have their own rhythmic character. So there's, of course, the rhythmic component, but from exclusively the harmonic standpoint, where your home bass resolution is what's going to help you make something feel, how you can use that diminished major seven and make it feel like a non-jazz by not going to another seventh chord. Alrighty, good question, good question. I don't know what minor chord progressions that is different all people. So this is a question that is probably going to be best referred to going to one of my earlier lessons, minor chord progressions. So what I wrote out here in the chart of harmonic chord progressions was for major, but it's the same essential chord progression chart for minor keys. And I can just the sonorities change. So you probably want to look at some of my earlier lessons that deal with harmonic progression and diatonic chords. So if you're in a minor key, 1 is minor, 2 is diminished, 3 is major, 4 is minor, 5 we don't make it a natural minor. Here we raise the leading tone, so it's we change a note, we add an accidental. 6 is major and 7 is diminished. Here again with the 2 stars, this is where we're not using the natural minor scale. We're using making it into like more of a harmonic minor type of sensibility. We raise the leading tone. So the chord progression chart that we had of 3 going to 6 to 2 to 5 to 1 that I had up before with major, it's still the exact same. 4 can happen here, and 4 can go down to 2, 5 can go down to 7 diminished, 5 can jump back as a deceptive resolution to 6, 3 can leapfrog to 4, 4 can jump to 1. So this is all the same as the chart I had up before for major, but the sonorities are different with the exception of 5 and 7, which are the same for both major and minor keys. So yeah, that should help you out if you kind of like you have some questions about minor chord progressions. Take a look at that, and then take a look at those lessons. That should get you started. Good. Thanks for that question. Reminds me a bit of chromatic planing. Yes, absolutely. Metalhead. I'm telling you, my demonic chord progression. I'm thinking there's got to be some metal groups that can really make. I mean, I just wish Iron Maiden had used that chord progression back in the day. All right. Yeah. Exactly. I like the back and forth with the metalhead. Of course, I agree. Always welcome. Andrew Norris was checking in. Awesome. All right, thank you, Andrew. Andrew's out in Croatia and doing his own videos and was able to use some of my videos to help him with composing. He's a filmmaker amongst being an artist and all around Renaissance man, and he's used some of the videos to help him writing music for his films, which is amazingly cool. Jana's here. Oh, Dr. B. I don't even know if I'm saying her name. Jana Mattia. A shout out to Jana. She's an amazing artist, an illustrator, and plays some guitar and loves music. Artists tend to like all the arts, but you should look her up. I predict she's going to be she's going to be famous in either like children's books or animated films or video games. She's got an amazing artistic eye, so look her up. Okay, there's always a common tone between the circle of fifths. Yes, there is. A hello from Italy, wonderful. Thanks for answering my online question. Oh, you got it, William. Could you analyze some Bach chorales in your videos? You know, I'm going to make a note. I'm going to write here on my thing, and the answer is yes. And I should absolutely just do. I'm writing it down right here. You can see Bach chorale. This is a note for me. I'm not going to do that today, but I have some materials. I've done that in my classes. It's challenging, right? It's really great to talk about everything in theory, but then see Bach do it and not know, is he doing a non-chord tone? Is it a secondary function? Is it a chromatic harmony? Is he breaking one of the rules? And if so, why? What's the reason? It's a real good challenge to actually analyze some Bach. So I will absolutely do that in the future. Greetings from Austria. Oh, hey, I spent some time in Vienna going to castles and eating pastries. It was amazing. So thank you, Austria. Could you explain hexagrams and gudonian hand? Okay, so I don't know what hexagrams are. That's not a term I've known, so I'm going to write that down. And I'll look into it. Now, I believe you spelled gudonian incorrectly, but that's okay. But I have something that'll tickle your fancy. Okay, check out, this is my water bottle. I'm going to hold it up here to the camera, and it's kind of fallen apart, and the sticker has fallen off. That's the gudonian hand. It looks like Guido of Arezzo got leprosy or something there. But one of my students gave me this water bottle as an appreciation, and I thought it was the most awesome water bottle ever to have. She found it with the gudonian hand on it. So I'm going to give you a quick version of the gudonian hand, and I just so happen to have that water bottle with me today, so it works out great, right? So you got this is going to be, please forgive. Okay, I can't even do it. Jana was watching and Andrew was watching. There's too many artists out there that I know that were watching that it's just too embarrassing to try to do it. Let me do it like kindergarten, right? So the idea behind the gudonian hand, and I can do another lesson because I'm not perfect on it, is that you have the different digits. So you might have, I'm going to write numbers because it's going to be easier to see. So there might be, and I don't know exactly, so bear with me. I'm just giving you my cursory understanding. Is that this was used back by Guido of Arezzo, who was an Italian. And this is called the gudonian. And it is, so this was Guido of Arezzo from Italy. So you can look up more. The idea was used for choirs to help them with singing. So if like you're memorizing the piece for a church service, or you're trying to, that's like sheet music was super expensive, all right? So you couldn't have sheet music for everyone. And so if you wanted to help teach the choir, you would have certain parts, like, so we have like digit, like 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. So every digit in the hand would stand for a different solfege syllable. So this is kind of where solfege comes from. Now they didn't call it do, they called it ut, because they were using, so ut, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti. Now we don't have that many fingers, right? So we had to go through the digits. And I don't know exactly how they got ordered, and I don't know if they actually had any kind of chromatic indicators as well. I wouldn't be surprised. But it was a way that like a choir conductor could help the orchestra remember what the melody was in difficult spots. Could kind of like point it out. Think about it like when you're landing the airplane at the airport and you have the guy with the flags being like this direction, like they know which direction they're supposed to go. He's just making sure that they're going the right direction and singing the right notes. So that's what the Gudonian hand was about, and why it was used. So that's a really interesting question, and I probably should learn a little bit more, especially when I do my music history videos, to explain it, because it is a real interesting thing, and it's got a cool image as well, the way they wrote it out in the textbooks back in the day. Okay, sparked interest in music theory and circle fifths. Do you have any recommendations for an exercise to make it easier to mentally lock in the numerical note scale degrees for each scale? Okay. Good question. Good question. To lock in the numerical note scale degrees. Let's see. I'm trying to quite understand, Ron, what you're asking. So I'm a little unclear, and so maybe you can type something in there, and I'll jump down and see if you did. Whether you're talking about where you have the names for the scale degrees, like tonic, supertonic, mediant. Let me spell that correctly though. Subdominant. So this is scale degree 1, 2, 3, 4, and then we go on to like dominant, submediant, leading tone. So I don't think this is what you're talking about. You might be talking about for the scales, like learning like for the different scales, so the difference between like a major scale, a natural minor, a ascending, melodic minor, or a harmonic minor, and how to memorize the different scale degrees and what they are for the so one of the things that's tricky with theory is there's so much terminology, and this is actually one of the bigger challenges. There's a lot of people who understand music theory much better than they would be able to express on a traditional test, because the terminology is not quite right. So I'm going to jump down here and see if Ron jumped in and said what he was referring to. Okay, not yet. That's okay, Ron. No worries. Mentally lock in the numerical note scale degrees for each scale. So for each scale, here's what I use a formula, and this is kind of what I think he's asking about. So for major scale, you're using 1, major second, major third, perfect fourth, perfect fifth, major 6, major 7. So you have your root, which we're just calling 1. Seconds, thirds, 6, 7s, they're major. The 2 in the middle, the 4th and the 5th, they're perfect. Now when you're dealing with natural minor, it stays major second. The major third becomes a minor third. These stay. So I'm going to do a little arrow like this to show it stays. The major 6 becomes a minor 6, the major 7 becomes a minor 7. So it's kind of it's interesting that with the exception of the second, so the 3, 6, 7 all go from major to minor. The 4 and the 5th stay the same, and the major second stays the same. So let me just write it so it looks the same, right? So the 3, 6, and 7 go from major to minor. The only thing that stays major in a natural minor scale is the second. It's a little confusing, and there's not a neat little formula there, but I like to make charts to mentally lock stuff in. So ascending melodic minor would again keep the major second. It does have the minor third. It keeps the perfect fourth, perfect fifth. It keeps that major 6, it keeps that major 7 from the major scale. So the only thing that's really changing from major to ascending melodic is the third goes from major to minor. And then for our harmonic minor scale, again, we keep our major second, we keep our, on all the minor scales, it's the third is the most important, right? Is determining things as minor. We keep the fourth, the fifth. Here we go, minor 6, major 7. So what's nice is when you're learning the different forms of scales, the second, the fourth, and the fifth, they're the same for all different forms of our traditional scales. We always have a major second, we always have a perfect fourth, we always have a perfect fifth. It's the 3, 6, and 7. That's what's going to change, right? That's what's different, right? So 3, 6, and 7. Now, major scale is the only one that has a major third. All the minor scales have a minor third. The 6 and the 7 are the ones that are the most variable, right? So we'll see that major and ascending melodic minor both have major 6s. We see that natural minor and harmonic minor have the minor 6. We see that all of them have a major 7 except the natural minor scale. Keep in mind that this is our kind of like our raised leading tone that we talk about. And so the major 7 is the most common, and the natural minor is the only one that has that minor 7. So creating some charts might help you lock it in. Again, you might want to reorganize and look for the patterns as you're seeing like the different intervals. And so hopefully that will help lock it in for you. All right. Oh yeah, I hear you, Ron. They all change when the scale changes. Well, that's what I was what I'm kind of point out is what's the things that stay the same? When so many things are changing, what stays the same? And so we know the second, fourth, and fifth stay the same. The third should be relatively easy, right? Major scales have a major third, minor scales all have a minor third. So it's then the 6 and the 7. So scale degree 6 and 7, right? So if we say, let's see if we can group things together, right? So we have our major scale. We're scale degrees 6 and 7, right? The major 6 is for also ascending melodic. And then if I were to put, let me put harmonic next and natural last. Let me put it this way and see if this, like making charts that make sense to your brain is like the trick. So let me see if this helps out, right? So this has a major 6, this has a major 6. So major and ascending are closely related. Harmonic and natural are closely related. They both have a minor 6, right? Major and ascending melodic minor both have major 6. Harmonic minor and natural minor both have a minor 6. Here, major scales have a major 7. Ascending melodic minors have a major 7. And harmonic minor has a major 7. Boom, 3 in a row. And only the natural minor has the minor 7. So if I go like this, maybe that helps, right? Maybe that helps, because that's the most confusing part, how the 6s can go. So if you say, okay, major and ascending versus harmonic and natural for the 6, and the top 3 for the 7th are all major, and the bottom one is minor. Give it a shot. You know, different systems work different for different people. Give that a try. Write it out a couple times. Sometimes writing it out will help cement things. And if that doesn't, experiment with some other methods that might work for you. But it's a good question. And yes, it is a challenge to get that all committed into your head. Metalhead 19 says, Dr. B, we see lots of composers use 6-7-1 cadence in a minor scale. It's against our harmonic progression chart, but still sounds pleasant. So is it considered as breaking the rules? Yes, it's breaking the rules of traditional functional harmony. So again, you have to say, well, what set of rules are we using? And different styles have slightly different rules. So you're absolutely right that things can sound, so 6, 7, 1. Yeah, that does sound good. It's very much what we call planing or parallel motion. So that kind of like, yeah, it sounds great. It's super powerful. You got all these parallel fifths. Metal music loves the parallel fifth. Sometimes just the fifth. Forget the third. You don't need that. This kind of thing. Now, what it is it has a different emotional effect. I agree, it both works, but it does break our chord progression chart. I'm trying to think how to best explain it. So it doesn't have, the traditional chord progressions are coming from an emotional place of multiple melodies coming together to create harmony. So you have 1 melody, 2 melody, 3 melody, 4 melody, they come together to create a chord. When you're doing something like 6-7-1, you're not having that multiple melody concept. That multiple melody concept is one of individual parts, like a feeling of like, oh, look at these individual things that come together to create harmony. There's a certain emotional when you kind of see that in the world, you know, individuals coming together. This is more like one big massive bomb, 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 powerful thing. It's a different feeling, and because a different feeling, it has certainly different rules to it as to why it works and why it doesn't work. This one certainly works because it's coming right out of the diatonic scale, so it's not like putting in things that are completely unrelated in the key. And the parallel motion has a logic to it, but it feels different than this. So when you're talking about breaking rules, you're really talking about rules for a specific style. And each style has its own rules, and it also has a good amount of overlap with other styles. So that's the tricky part, right? So metal and classical music has overlap. It's not 100%, you know, I don't know what the percentage is, but there's a substantial overlap. But there's also things that are very, very different stylistically. So that's the thing when you're looking at the rules, saying rules, are these rules that are more in the style side of things, or these are more rules for what's overlapping? In the case you mentioned, this is not something you would really find in classical music, but it is something you would find in other styles like metal. So good question. Pyro, I know on your channel you teach music theory 1 and 2, but is there music theory 3 and 4? Is there a limit to theory knowledge college-wise? So yes, there is usually music theory 3 and 4, and I've taught music theory 3, but I don't teach that regularly. Usually I just get people started off on the right path, and then they take it from there. After music theory 1, 2, 3, and 4, they go into something called like special topics. So there'll be something like a form and analysis, where they'll look specifically at form. They'll go into 20th century music theory, so they'll deal with 12-tone music and maybe even microtonality and other music styles that were from the mid to late 20th century. And then they'll also sometimes go into orchestration as part of the area of music theory. So depending on what your major is, specific major within music, because you don't just major in music. You major in music performance or music education or music composition or music theory. So if you were to major in music theory, then yeah, it keeps going and going and going and going in terms of what you can kind of study. But usually it'll start off, it'll then get more into the form, it'll get into different time periods, so 20th century, as well as going backwards, so into, let's say, Renaissance and medieval, or even ethnomusicology, so the music theory of other cultures, where you're not just dealing with 7 notes, 12 chromatic notes in a scale. So you can spend a whole lifetime understanding the music from different time periods and from different cultures. So it's a big field, and I actually have a former student who is a doctoral music theory going to have her doctorate in music theory pretty soon, and she's studied music theory in many of these different areas at a very, very high level. Yeah. All right. A Bach chorale. This is from Alex. I'm analyzing has a weird chord in A minor, a D diminished chord in second inversion. What could that be? All right. Let's write it out. Let's write it out and see what we have here. A minor. Okay, so we're in the key of A minor. A minor. We have a D diminished in second inversion, which means the A flat is in the bass. So let me see. I'm in A minor. I like to use the piano. And we got so is it maybe, so here's my first guess. Where does it go? Where does it come from and where does it go? To me, it sounds just out of, it sounds to me more like a G sharp diminished 7 chord omitting the third. So G sharp, we have an implied B, D, F. So D diminished would be D, F, A flat. So there's my D, there's my F, there's my A flat. I'm sorry. The A flat is enharmonically the G. So when you say D diminished in second version, is that really a G sharp diminished 7 chord omitting the third? And just so you know, for those of you familiar with your major triads and minor triads, it's not uncommon to omit the fifth. Like a perfect fifth can be omitted pretty easily. But when you're dealing with a diminished 7 chord, fully diminished 7 chord, the note you most often omit is the third. So when I see that in the key of A minor, I wonder to myself, well, if that goes to A minor, then it is definitely, and so then you might say, well, why write it as an A flat when it's really functioning as a G sharp? I think sometimes those things are done because it might be easier for the performer to read it because of the way it fits in the other part, with the melody. So sometimes composers will write something enharmonically to make it easier for the performer. So perhaps that's the reason. Without seeing the exact chorale and looking at what comes before and after, that would be my first guess. Hope that helps. All right. Pyro, is there a rabbit hole that doesn't end? Correct. Yeah, you can always learn more. Andrew, thanks for the shout out. I appreciate that. Can you give a short musicological assessment of punk rock? I don't know a lot about punk rock. I mean, I was a kid and the movie Repo Man came out, and so I listened to some punk music for a while. I'll give you a short. I'll give you something short, knowing that I know very little about punk music. I'm definitely not, haven't listened to that anywhere near as much as I've listened to other styles. So if we talk about punk rock, harmonically, it's pretty much triads and pretty much diatonic. So harmonically, it's pretty simple. Keep in mind some of the ideas behind punk rock was that it was not meant to be cultured and elevated and learned. This was more of like common man, common person, angry at the system. So I'm thinking like London and that kind of like rebelling against the establishment. And so if the establishment was going to music school and learning lots of music theory, they were going to keep it simple. So they were keeping it simple, triads, from a harmonic standpoint, from a music theory standpoint. The message of the music was meant to be readily understood, expressed frustration, anger, to a certain extent, depending on it. There was the idea of like a real punk would never get old. Like, so it would be hard for, you kind of like, I'm reminded of the scene in the original Blade Runner movie where the character Rutger Hauer plays, who's an android, asks his maker, "How long am I going to live?" And his maker says something about, the star that burns ever so brightly burns that much shorter, or something like that. And that was kind of like a punk sensibility of like, you're going to burn really bright, but you're going to burn out young. So that kind of, from the lyrics lyric standpoint, that plays a big role in terms of the kind of aggressiveness of the music, and then also the kind of the balance between pitch and noise, right? So pitched sound, so we're dealing with like singing, versus noise, which is like so periodic sound waves versus erratic sound waves. So if we think about like screamo or some like death metal type of stuff where it's not really singing anymore, it's screaming or shouting, there's an aspect in punk music that shifts it more towards that. And same with like the level of distortion on your guitars and things like that. Drums and percussion in general, not all, but many, are more in the noise category. So a cymbal crash is a non-periodic vibration versus, a guitar pitch is periodic, but if there's also some distortion in it, then it's periodic mixed in with some non-periodic vibrations. So this kind of like relationship, if we're talking about like Mozart, it's like 99% pitch with maybe 1% noise. There might be a, Turkish march has a cymbal in it or something, but it could have 0 to 1% of the kind of noise sounds. And I'm not making a judgment on like pitch versus noise, good or bad. I'm just like factually, scientifically, what's involved with it. Whereas punk music might have it be more like 60-40. I don't know if that's accurate. It would depend on, it's like any big category, there's a lot of differentiation within it. But maybe that balance is a little bit more, So, I'm trying to take the musicological scientific approach here. My father, when I listened to Iron Maiden as a kid, would be like, "What's that noise you're listening to?" As if it were 100%. And what he really was saying is, "What's that music that I don't like?" Yes, there's a certain more of a noise ratio to what I was listening to than what he was listening to, because he loved Beethoven and Chopin and classical music. So I grew up with that in the house. But I think that would be my very, very quick and fairly uninformed opinion, musicological opinion on what punk music. But again, some of those are some of the questions you'd want to look into if you were going to make a more in-depth musicological analysis of punk music, different styles. Looking at this relationship of pitch to noise, I think would be critical. The harmonic complexity, and in the case of punk music, lack thereof, the simplicity, and the reasons why you would do that. All important and relevant. Alex was saying, I think they still use the hand method in Russia for solfege classes. That's pretty cool. I don't know enough. In America they have like the sign language version, and a lot of choral teachers still do that. I'm not a choral teacher, and so I never really learned it. But one of the choir teachers that works for me, she knows how to do all that stuff. She has all the kind of like, so it's like the American Sign Language version of the Gudonian hand. So it still exists in some form or another, also in America, for certain choral conducting, in just slightly different versions. Hexachords. Okay. So hexachords. All right. So I'm gonna save hexachords. I'm gonna write that down, and I'm gonna save that for another time. I'm gonna start off the next one. So hopefully 2 weeks from today, we're gonna talk Bach chorales and hexachords. I'm gonna save that one, in part because I would like to brush up a little bit before I talk too much about it. Can you give progressions with usage of Neapolitan chord? Yes. You spelled it incorrectly, but that is okay. I will help you out. So a Neapolitan chord, in part made famous by Italian composers. Neapolitan. Did I spell it wrong? Politan. I think I did. I think I spelled it wrong as well. Okay, so it's a flat 2 chord. If you look at, and it's usually in first inversion. So if we're in the key of C major, it would be a D flat major triad with F in the bass. All right. So the Neapolitan chord, and I do have a lesson on this called the Neapolitan chord, so you can get a nice in-depth version of that. So 1, 4, 5, 1. Neapolitan chords typically come in between 4 and 5. And so function, so you might, and then you'd have to move to 5-1. So let me figure out another voicing as well, because I don't think I did the voice leading quite right there. I'm sorry. Yeah, that's better. So if we go 1, 4, Neapolitan 6, and it often will be a 5-7 chord when you go to the Neapolitan. So let me do it again. 1, 4, Neapolitan 6, 5-7, 1. And let me show you how I'm doing the voice leading for that, because the voice leading is important. When you're doing a Neapolitan, chord, it's really easy to get some like weird augmented or diminished intervals in your voice leading, which makes it very difficult for singers to sing, and it can kind of sound a bit awkward. So I'm just going to do the right hand of what I'm doing. And I'll do it up the octave, so it's just a little bit easier to see. So this to this to this to this to this. Okay, and so this would be our, and we're in the key of C, 1, 4, Neapolitan 6, 5-7, 1. So you imagine the correct bass note, if you would, please. I'm also doing this down the octave. But it'll be easier for you to read. So you can see that here the A goes to A flat and the C goes up a half step. So, and then the A flat's going down to G by step, and the D flat's going to B. And this is one of the few like diminished intervals that's allowed in voice leading, because it's doing that around tonic. So B, D flat to B is a diminished third. It's one of the few diminished intervals that's allowed. So let me play it again for you. So that's the most common progression, and it's usually again inserted. Though you could come from, you go straight from 1 to the Neapolitan 6, right? It doesn't have to come from 4. You could, in front of it, you could have a 2 chord. You could have a 4 chord, a 2 chord, a 1 chord. I wonder if you could have a 3 chord, right? Because kind of like the Neapolitan 6 often functions like a 4-chord, right? So you know how you have this progression of that might be hard because of the parallel motion. I wonder if we could figure out. That would be going to the Neapolitan. It gets a weird interval. But I think you could do it. I could figure out a way to do that if we were. So let's go. Yeah, you can kind of figure out what goes before. What happens is the Neapolitan almost always goes to a 5/7 afterwards, so you have less options there. But look at my lesson video. I talk some more about it there, so you can get some good stuff there. All right. We got some people that had to leave, but we'll rewatch the video later. That's why I archive these things. You know, the last one got archived very strangely and had all these weird popping sounds in the audio, and I apologize for that. I'm not sure why it uploaded that way, but it had all these problems. So I'm trying out a lav mic to see if that will make things and make the sound a bit better. So I hope it does. I like to have as high quality as possible. Okay. All right. So Red Dot Rabbit. So I mentioned some music history videos. I only have one made up. So during this whole pandemic, I made one as just like a demo, and it's on my YouTube channel that you're watching right now. It's on Franz Liszt. I haven't made the series, and I'm really thinking that I'm probably going to get started. My college has yet to decide whether we're going to be doing all our classes online or in person or some combination of the two for the fall. So I might just proactively start making some of the music history ones. One is if we do go 100% online, I'll be ready to go, and that'll be very helpful if that's the way it works. The other is it's a project that I've been interested in for a long time, and this might be the right time to put in the time and make those videos. So unfortunately, they're not there yet. I just have the one on Franz Liszt that you can look up here on this YouTube channel. All right. This is from Jarm. Hello, doctor. I'm a game programmer and want to create my own music for my own games. What do you recommend to ground zero beginners to learn, understand, and practice start on that journey? All right, good question. So here's the other from ground zero. So I think that's a great idea. Like, you're going to be programming your own games. You know, you can learn how to compose the music as well. I think that's a great thing to do, to be the person who has complete control over the finished product. So my lessons start with lesson one, but lesson one already assumes, so my music theory videos, lesson one, already assumes that you know how to read music. I mean, I go over it a little bit, but I go so fast. And I'm really starting at like a review. So lesson one for me is a review of like music reading. So this is music theory one, and I start there and go. But there's an entire intro to music theory class that we offer at my college, because I had so many people that would start out on music theory one, which makes sense, right? It's music theory one. And they weren't ready for it because they were at ground zero, just like you're talking about. They'd never written music or read music. And it just moves too fast. Music theory one just moves way too fast for someone to be successful without an extraordinary amount of homework on their end and time. So we developed an introduction to music theory class. And just so you know, this might be online at my college, and which means you could sign up for it. I mean, it would cost you money, but it wouldn't be crazy. It would be for like a 6-week course. I think it would be like $300. But what I'm thinking about doing is also creating some intro to music theory videos, but I haven't done them yet. But there are some really great books out there. So let me see if I can just pull some of these out. I have my bookshelf here. So this is part 2, but this is an old edition. It's a program. They have like harmonic materials and tonal music, program course. Go for part 1. The way they do that, the way they set up the book, you kind of have to cover up one side because they have the question on one side and the answers right next to it. You can kind of go through. This is going to be pretty complicated because this is the second book, and you can see it's a reasonably thick book. But book 1 starts you right from the beginning. So I would recommend look at my music theory lesson 1. Anything you don't get some of these books. You can get them used for like so cheap. It's ridiculous. So harmonic materials in tonal music is one book, and the author is Paul O. Harder. The other is HarperCollins College Outline, which is a music theory book. It's a cheap book. It's nothing fancy, but it's got the information. Mine's an old copy, but you can see. Let me see. I'll get. They start off pretty basic. They talk about rhythms, and they get complicated pretty quickly. But that's the kind of sense. And this is again. So this is one. Then Harper Collins College Outline for Music Theory. They have an excellent one for music history as well. And then lastly, Alfred's Essential Music Theory. I think that's the name of the book. But this is the one that we use at my college. And it comes with 2 CDs. I know, old school, who has a CD player anymore? Where you can kind of like connect it to what it sounds like. So those are 3 books that I would recommend that you use, and they're not like traditional college textbooks that are like insanely expensive. These are all, you can get them used, and they're paperbacks, and you can get them for pretty cheap. So hopefully that'll get you started. Great. All right. Can you talk about the harmonic role in music when the guitar is distorted? Yeah. So that's a great question, kind of from our discussion of punk music. So the harmonic. So the guitar is an amazing instrument. Okay. And it can play so many different functions, right? So if we talk about when it's distorted versus, let's call it pure, for lack of a better word, all right? So the guitar, when it's playing, it's unlike my instrument, the saxophone, that doesn't easily play chords. Guitar can either play melody. It can play melody, and it can play chords. It can do both, right? And in either case, the function, so it can have a melodic function, it can have a chords, which means a harmonic function, and we should definitely not forget that it has a rhythmic function. Now, when you distort the sound of the guitar, if you're using it to play chords and a harmonic function, it intensifies the rhythmic character of it, or it can, because like think about snare drum or crash cymbals, like in a march, like where you're like da 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 da, crash crash da 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 da, right? So if you have this kind of distorted guitar and it's kind of hammering out these chords, it gives it this kind of rhythmic crunch to it. So the distortion, when combined with the chords and the harmonic function, can increase the rhythmic character and rhythmic role that it's playing. If the distortion is being applied to the melody, we're talking about a timbral change. And this kind of goes to how does that change the quality? It gives it a more raw, like a raw timbral sound and a feeling to it. Think about it like the difference between like a classical singer versus a blues singer. A blues singer is going to have kind of the equivalent of more distortion than a classical singer. A classical singer is going to be a very pure sound, lots of pitch, very little noise in the ratio. A blues singer might have a little bit more, like, think about like Louis Armstrong or something with that raspy voice. But it gives it this certain raw quality. It's a different timbre, a different character. So think about like the distortion is again that idea of the relationship, percentage relationship between pitch, periodic sound waves, and noise. And so I think I answered your question, the harmonic role about its harmonic role in music. Yeah, so as long as the distortion is not so much, like if it's like 1% pitch and 99% distortion, your harmonic role is obliterated. But if it's somewhere more in the middle, then by adding distortion to the harmonic role, it kind of boosts the rhythmic aspect of, or it can boost the rhythmic aspect of what the guitar is doing. All right, three-part counterpoint rules and tips. I'm going to write that down. I don't know if I'll get to that. This is one of the areas that I have not done a ton of study in. So I did when I studied species counterpoint, and that's something that some colleges will have you start like in Music Theory 1. They'll start you with species counterpoint. And other colleges don't do it until graduate school, like when you're getting a master's degree in music. I didn't do it until graduate school. And I only did two-part. I only studied two-part formally. And although I've done some reading on three-part, I've never taught it formally. So I would say that I'm not an expert. So I'm going to politely say, Sputnik, that's one of the areas I need to improve and read up on. And I'm not quite ready to share it because I'm not going to have the kind of cohesive step-by-step process and tips that I have for the other things I talk about. It's a great question and a wonderful topic to learn more about, though. All right, Alex goes, I think I figured it out. That Bach chorale in A minor I mentioned is tonicizing C major, so the D half diminished seventh chord is borrowed from the C minor. Yeah, that absolutely could be what it is. Absolutely. Yeah. Modulation is the other thing that gets involved. Jarm's asking which college. So I teach at two colleges, both in the United States and New York State. My full-time is Dutchess Community College, so it's a 2-year college. And a lot of my students then will transfer to a lot of conservatories and stuff from there. And that's the one I'm chair at, and that has the academy with credit-free stuff. And then I also teach at Vassar College. They're both in the same city of Poughkeepsie, New York. So these are the two colleges I teach at. And I love the area, and I really enjoy teaching at both colleges. It's different kinds of, students always need to learn more about music theory wherever they are. All right, we are getting close to the end of our questions here in almost 2 hours, which is a great Q&A, and I'm glad you are all here with me. Are you aware, another question, are you aware of any examples of atonality being used in the development section of a sonata with strong tonality in the exposition and recapitulation? That's a great question. I'm sure it exists. Let me just write that out there. So you have a sonata which has an exposition, which is a section where you have a theme 1, theme 2. Some people will call it primary theme, secondary theme. There might be a transition in here. There might be then you have a development section where you usually develop those two themes, and then you have something called a recapitulation, where you hear your theme 1 and your theme 2 again. Now, one of the things that's really unique about the sonata form is that theme 1 will be in your tonic key, so I'm using Roman numeral 1. Theme 2 will almost always be in your dominant key, so it'll modulate. In the recapitulation, theme 1 is in your tonic key, and then, for the first time ever, theme 2 is also in your tonic key, and this is what makes this sonata form so awesome and so emotionally resonating with audiences. You basically establish theme 1, theme 2 as in opposition to each other, or some kind of tension between the two, because one is in one key, one is the other key. When you do the development, you're modulating, you're going even farther, you're creating more tension. And then when you come back to theme 1 in the tonic, you're like, back to home base. A feeling of relaxation and good feeling happens. And then when you finally hear theme 2 back in the tonic key for the first time ever, then it seems like all is right with the world, that these two things have been reconciled after all the things that they've gone through. So the question is, could you have this regular kind of key scheme for the, do I know of any examples where you have this regular key scheme for the exposition and the recapitulation, but you have an atonal development? I don't know of any examples off the top of my head. I think when you were talking about Schoenberg, who's kind of like the inventor of atonality, and then the students that followed him, like Anton Webern and Alban Berg, they really wanted to get away from tonality 100%, so they weren't interested in blending the two like what this is. So this would have happened much later. Some people will argue that composers like Richard Strauss and maybe even Wagner had sections that were atonal, that were so chromatic that they were atonal. And so I would say that, so here's how I would approach that. I've always thought that explanation of Strauss and Wagner being early atonality was not really accurate, because if you don't know what key center you are in at any one moment, that doesn't mean you're atonal. It just means that it's in flux. The tonality is in flux. And so that if you do this within this, is it really atonality? Is there really no sense of tonality? I mean, in the microcosm, there might not be. But in the big picture, there is, which is kind of like the opposite of what atonality is trying to go for. So I'm not quite sure. This would have to be a long development section with a lot of dissonance and no resolution for this to be heard not in relationship to what came before and how it gets resolved afterwards. So for this to really sound like atonality would have to be pretty in-depth, pretty long. When people talk about Richard Strauss and Wagner being atonal, it's not long enough, and it's in context. I don't think it sounds atonal. It sounds dissonant, and it sounds like it's tonality in flux, which I think is different than atonal. So I would argue that people like Strauss and Wagner, kind of like, if we use the term atonal very loosely, would fit what you're talking about. I'm not sure if I can pick up specific pieces, because like some Richard Strauss music is totally like very traditional, and some of it's pretty experimental. And I don't have any titles that are coming to the top of my head. To actually get it where it's like really deep atonal, I don't know if there's been people who have done that. So for a long time, when atonality came into being, that's all composers did. So it would be all atonal. And then when you get people like Steve Reich and Philip Glass going into minimalism, they go back to tonality, and they're not, but it's like a simplified, slow-moving tonality. And they're not really putting atonality. I'm sure there's been some people who've done this. I just don't know if they've been, I don't know how successful. And when I say successful, I don't mean in terms of necessarily musical quality, though maybe, but in terms of how successful at reaching a wider audience that has been. Atonality in general does not reach a wide audience. But that's a great question. I'm wondering if like some Luciano Berio, I wonder if some of his stuff might do that. So there are some kind of like composers of this kind of like 1950s, 1960s that if someone was going to be experimenting with it, it would probably be some of those folks. Great, interesting question. I love getting challenged, and you know, I don't know everything, but it's always good. All right, it's always good to be asked questions. All right, then. Ooh, how to give sadness feeling using major gamut. Oh yeah, so I'll have that be my last question, and I'm not going to give an in-depth answer because you could spend 2 hours alone just talking about how to make something major feel sad. So very often people will talk about happy, sad in terms of major and minor. But key is only one aspect that creates emotion, right? We also have, so you can have key, but we also have things like tempo, right? So in general, you would say fast and slow. Dynamics play a role. Generally loud versus soft. What about rhythm? And rhythm is different than tempo. Okay, tempo is how fast the beat goes. Rhythm is the kind of rhythms that are within that. And I'm not going to keep going, but let's just limit ourselves to these. So key, tempo, and dynamics. So if you have something that's in major, fast, and loud, chances are, I can't think of a way that you could make that sound sad. I'm just trying to imagine. And that would be a great challenge, right? As to a composer, like if I was teaching a composition student, be like, okay, I want you to write a piece that sounds sad, that's major, fast, and loud. I think, I guess, I'm going to erase rhythm here. I think I'm just trying to think, how would you do it? And I think you'd have to do it with like the only way is if you put in maybe lots of dissonance, then maybe you could get it to sound sad, but probably not. But let's take those top three. You know, if you had something that was major but slow and soft, you might be able to get it to sound really sad, right? You could have something that's, think about like, oh, think about Eric Satie, the Gymnopédies. Listen to that. And I don't know, it's the... Ah, sorry. I'm butchering it, but it's major, but it was with major sevenths. So the seventh chord, so the level of dissonance, right? So if you have a little bit more dissonance, with a seventh in there, you might be able to get it. It's slow and soft. So just think about when you have these variables, how you could get sad out of major, because there's other factors. Like you can have something in minor that doesn't sound sad. It can sound happy, more like victorious drama, you know. So you have something like, if you're going like, so volume and speed with minor can make things sound more dramatic and intense. So keep in mind when you're talking about emotion, all the different musical aspects that go into it, and how you can kind of like almost kind of mix and match to kind of create gradations. Because let's be honest, right? Human beings have more than 2 emotional settings. We're a lot more complicated than that. So the gradations of like, well, if we do some major with slow but loud but with lots of dissonance, how does that, like, what, you know, what's the difference between sadness, despair, nostalgia, reflectiveness, pensiveness? There's all these words that kind of are around regret, right? Like regret versus sad. Like all these words, they're not synonyms. They're different shadings and subtle emotions that are all around this, you know, different polar opposites, so to speak. So to talk about your question, if I was going to give the quick answer to your question, I would say if you want to give major a sad feeling, make it slow and soft. Put a little dissonance in there too to kind of make it feel like something's a little unsettled and not quite right with the world. All right? So, folks, thank you for joining me. I hope you had a good time, and this was a ton of fun. I hope to be back in 2 weeks, Saturday 2 weeks, 1 p.m. Eastern Time. And I hope you can join me. If you can't, you know I'm going to archive these on my website, and you can kind of review them and look at them again if you're interested, or if there's something that you caught your interest and you want to delve down a little deeper. So have a great weekend. Goodbye, everybody.